Hey guys, welcome to another Back to Jerusalem podcast. I'm Eugene Buck, your host for this time, and I'm coming to you live on delay from somewhere within the borders of China this time. I'm super excited about a brand new book that we've just come out with. That's why I've asked for Bethany, the director of our UK office, to join us for this podcast. Bethany, thanks so much for being with us again.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I think this is I feel like maybe we say it every time, but I think this is maybe the most exciting project that we've done with Underground Publishing House so far.
Yeah, I know. I know that we get old saying, "Oh, this is like the best book we've ever come out with." But I really, to be honest with the audience, when I think to myself about the best writing that I feel like I'm capable of doing, or sometimes even more than I'm capable of doing, in the way that the Holy Spirit kind of led me and guided me on doing the writing, it would be the Shackled book and this one. These two books, there's just something about them that when I reread them or I go back through during the editing process, I'm like, who was writing that? Because I don't recognize this writing, right? I really do feel like this was inspired by the Holy Spirit.
I remember when you went back through it and we were just beginning the editing process and you wrote me being like, wow, this is a great book. Is that an unbiased review? Yeah. Just for everyone that is watching and not just listening, here's a visual. It's a author's copy, so we have this on here, which won't be there. But this is the hardback cover. So we'll have the ebook, the hardback, and the paperback all available, so you can kind of take your pick. We'll talk about more of those details. But we wrapped this up not too long ago, a few months ago, really, about spring of this year. And obviously, all of the BTJ books we love and you love because you wrote them. But there are certain books that I think I said it to you in the way that it feels like you can tell you enjoyed writing it, that there was something that kind of sparked in you as you were writing it. And you can really feel that. And we've had the opportunity to give a couple of people, I think 4 people, if I'm not mistaken, kind of early access to read this book before it came out. And we're hearing some good things.
Yeah, you've been writing to me just saying, "Wow, the reaction to this book is kind of crazy." I've been getting personal notes from people that have gotten early access to it, and the response has been quite phenomenal. But let me go back just a minute, because this book about Abdull is something that is special for me, because I've been working with Abdull for almost, I want to say, like 2 decades. It may not be that long, but if I'm to go back in my memory, it's been a while. Let's put it that way. Even though I've never met him, or I didn't meet him until recently, I worked with him through a third party. So I worked with him through a third party in Iraq, in Syria. We've been based, Back to Jerusalem has been based in Switzerland for many years. And so our base organization in Switzerland that hosts Back to Jerusalem is called AVC. It's an organization called AVC. They're in partnership together with Back to Jerusalem. They raise money for Back to Jerusalem in Switzerland, and they actually have hired Abdull and have been working with him as their missionary for many years. And so here you have Abdull, the grandson of an Ayatollah, and that's how I knew him. I didn't really know that much about him. I just knew that he was trained as a fanatic. I knew that he was trained in a madrassa to walk in the footsteps of his grandfather. And so when I got the chance to work together with him in the Middle East, I was super pumped. It's just a pleasure working together with him. He stayed incognito, secretly operating in these countries. But when I met with him for the first time a couple of years ago, there was this whole other lifestyle that I didn't know anything about. And we connected right away when he said that, yeah, my background is in the military, actually, not in Bible school or just religious teaching. And I was like, no way. And so as we began to talk about his military experience and what he went through and how he died on the battlefield during jihad, I didn't die on any battlefield. I wasn't a tank commander. I wasn't even in live combat like he was. But the whole military link really put us together. And he said that, I've delayed for all these years. He's now in retirement age. And so he said, I've delayed all these years to tell my story because I've waited for the right person. And I haven't met anybody that I feel would be able to tell my story. And in fact, when he and I first met for the first time, it was, we never conversed in a way that, oh, hey, I'm going to write your story, you're going to tell it, and that's how it's going to work. In fact, I met with him for dinner one night in Greece, and I said, you know what? Because I was asked to write his story. I said, let's do this. Let's just you and I hang out and let the Spirit lead. And if you decide that, I'm not the right one, or if I decide that your story sucks and I don't want to write it, then we part ways, and at least we get a good meal out of it. And as he began to talk about his military background, God just kind of brought us together in this bond that I really feel like the Holy Spirit was leading our conversations, so much to the point that we were in this small community out on the edge of northern Greece by this beach kind of area where he does training for leaders. And he and I were sitting together. We had to take several breaks because some of his story is so intense. So he had to make himself extremely vulnerable to tell it. That on many occasions, this is a tough guy. He would have to get up, walk away and cry, and come back before he could finish even like one part of his story. He'd be interrupted again by emotions and tears. And he was like, I'm sorry, Eugene. I haven't ever told anybody about this. And so there are things that he's never told another person, even his own wife, that made it into this book. And I think you can feel that.
I remember after that first meeting, and you wrote me saying, I think maybe I know what the next book's going to be. And you kind of, there are a few people that ask you to write their stories, and, these kind of requests can sometimes come in, and it didn't come from Abdull necessarily. It came from a third party to write the story. And so you kind of went with an open mind. I'll meet the guy. We'll just see what happens. And you came back and you were like, this is how I know it's God. Look at this video of these birds in the sky. It was just like, I think it was like you needed to be there kind of moment, because it was the most boring video of some random birds in the sky. But it obviously was this meeting where you both felt, I remember you saying that he'd wanted to tell his story, or felt he should tell his story. But it just hadn't been the right fit, the right person. And I just think to find two people that have mission, Christ, and the military, and that one writes a book, one has a great story, it was just an amazing combination. And I mean, he'll actually be at our Voice of the Persecuted conference this year. And I'm just excited to see our relationship with Abdull, because he really is an incredible, incredible person who really has that kind of B2J rebellious spirit that we kind of love to embrace.
Yes, you're right. I completely forgot about that. So on the very first day of us really spending the entire day together,
it's not going to translate. It's not going to translate.
I'm going to tell it anyway, because we're sitting outside at this little cafe. It's an abandoned cafe, right? So anybody that has this like romantic feeling that we're somewhere in Europe at this really fancy kind of terrace, sitting at a French cafe, drinking really small little lattes or whatever. I don't know what people drink in Europe, to be honest. But forget about that. We're sitting at some rusty tables that are like abandoned furniture in a place that looks a little bit like a junkyard for boats. And we're sitting there together. And while we're sitting there, this formation of birds that is densely packed so tightly that it almost blocks the sun. I'm talking thousands of birds, not hundreds, thousands of birds. And it's this massive formation moving across the sky, and it catches our attention, and we're both looking at it. Now, I wish it would translate on video. I tried. I sent it to you, and you completely burst my bubble because it didn't translate into video.
I didn't say anything at the time because it was obviously like a really special moment for you, and I didn't want to ruin it. But what I did get, what I did get from it was there was so much intensity to this meeting in so many different ways. Is I wasn't trying to poke fun. I was saying there was so many different ways that there was such an intensity of that initial meeting of this is something that you had to do. And to honestly, to have the privilege of telling his story for the first time, I think we felt pretty honored to do that. And so we wanted to do it justice. And I think I can say on your behalf, I think that the writing was really powerful and people have responded to that. We had our amazing guy that does all of our covers just do such a great job. And so we really wanted to make sure that all of this was done well to kind of honor his story and his testimony, because I pray that this book really does find its way into so many people's hands, not
Yeah.
just our.
And I know that you just did a segue. I'm going to go back to my bird experience because it's so important. Thousands of birds. Now wait. They came in like swooshed in right in front of us, and then dispersed like in every direction, and then came back collectively together into a single formation, and then went back out again. So it was this dance that just went back and forth where they weaved in and out of each other for about 15 minutes.
Did
I
they
mean,
spell jihad in the sky?
they didn't spell jihad, but they both of us stopped what we were doing and we stood up. If you were there, you would have felt it. Like
I believe that.
it was a moment. And
Yeah.
it that was kind of a sign to both of us that there's something interesting here. And to take that even further, when I finally wrote the book, I went away and I spent the summer kind of alone, and I wrote his story without anybody else around. I just allowed the Holy Spirit to kind of marinate as I re-listened to the recordings that I had done of his story. And when we came back together to make sure it was correct, I remember we were in Stockholm, and I got an apartment for the two of us to kind of meet up in Old Town. And so he came to Old Town in Stockholm, which is already kind of this place that has a bit of this nostalgic feeling. And so we're in this, over 1,000-year-old apartment in Old Town, Stockholm, and I begin to read because that's kind of my SOP, really. My standard operating procedure is I always read the story to the person that I actually wrote it, and then we go through together to make sure, does this adequately reflect what you told me, what your life is? Is there parts that we need to change or go back or go a different direction? And I have to say his was probably the easiest I've ever done, because as I was reading it, he just went into tears and he was like, brother, this is exactly what he said to me. He said, brother, were you there? Like, as I'm talking about different things, he was like, it feels like you were there. Like you're describing it in a way that I didn't even, you're almost making me remember what it was like actually being in that situation. That's not by talent. That's not by, I would even say gifting. It's not something that I'm gifted with. It's by a supernatural moment that just clicked and it translated on paper at that time. And so when you read it, I don't know if you picked this up or not, but as you read it, I think that the language and the storytelling element is timeless. Not just a quick story that's told, to share his testimony as if you're reading it in a magazine.
Yeah, I think the incredible thing about this story is it's kind of one of those stories where you think you've reached the like climax of the story and then something else happens. Then you think, oh, that must be the climax of the story. And then something else happens. And I gave one of our proof copies to a young guy at the church that I go to, and he actually got saved at a BTJ meetings when he was a teenager. So his story is pretty amazing, and I gave him this book to read, and he, is a teenager. He's not necessarily massive on reading, but he just, not only did he not put this book down, but I think everyone in my church is sick and tired of hearing about it because he just will not shut up about this book. I mean, he's so desperate to meet Abdull and his story. And then on the other side, we have someone at the same church who has been a B2J supporter for a long, long time since we've been going, really. And he's an older guy in his late 70s, and I gave him one, and he came back to me. He was going to take it with him when he went on vacation for the weekend, but instead, because of this younger guy that wouldn't shut up talking about it, he went, "I'm going to give it a go and just start reading it now." And he read the whole thing in 3 days, and he just came back to me, and he just was trying to explain. He just said, "Bethany, it's just so powerful to me to read this story." And he said a couple of things he said is it helped him pray better, which I just thought was such an amazing reflection after you come away from a book. Not, "Oh, that was a great story," but he came away from it and he said, "It helped me pray better for brothers and sisters in Iran." And he said, and it also gives you that hope and amazement that God is using people all around the world. And it's the Apostle Paul's that began as Saul, who you just would have thought, there's no way that this person will ever be used by God. And Abdull is doing the most incredible things to this day. But his story is one that, yeah, it would not surprise me if it was a movie one day.
Yeah, and I mean, Abdull actually got you get a glimpse into his life through this book, and what I don't do is I don't tell the second part of his life, which is in many ways competitive in trying to like in the way that it would be just as exciting or even more so than the first part of his life. So you just get this first part of his life, how the grandson of an Ayatollah ends up dying in jihad, becoming a Christian, and then being put on death row in Iran for his faith. Just if I don't want to give out any spoiler alerts because you won't believe how the story ends. So at the end of the story, which is just kind of happens in an abrupt way because you just don't see it coming, all true, all documented. But what actually happens after the book is how he becomes a missionary to Afghanistan and Syria and Iraq and helping refugees that make their way into Europe. One of the things that I think is really important about this book as well is that if you have Muslim friends or individuals in your life that you're wanting to minister to that are believe in the Islamic faith, this is the book for them, because this book is specifically written in a way that it's not overtly Christian, right? So as a Muslim, you can actually look at this book, look at the cover, the outside cover, and it's not going to say anything about becoming a Christian or following Jesus in any way. And as a Muslim, you can actually start to read this story of Abdull's life. And as you read through his story for the first half, there's nothing about Christianity or God. It's all about Islam and Allah. And for a lot of, especially Muslim men, I think that this book would attract them and speak directly to them. They would be able to find themselves walking in the same shoes as Abdull, or at least that's my opinion.
Well, though, that was kind of a real specific request that he had too, that it would be something that a Muslim could pick up and not immediately, because we played with some different names. Leaving Allah was one of the names that we thought about, and there was various other names that were considered. But Abdull really wanted to make sure that it had every chance and every possibility to end up in the hand of Muslims. And it's not that the entire book has nothing Christian in it. It's like you said, just to reiterate for those listening, it's about halfway in, then suddenly the book really follows Abdull's own thought process, where he never even considered Christianity to even be potentially the truth. And so the book reflects that. And then, of course, the turning point comes. And then he goes through an awful lot for his faith. But if for the people that are watching this, this is not the thinnest book in the world, and so it would be double the size if we began to write about what he's doing today and everything he did after. So there may be a second book. We'll see. We don't want to ruin any of that yet. That's not even really been talked about. But yeah, his whole life, this and then also what came after, is equally as incredible.
Yeah, we're really looking forward to going around the world, speaking on tours together with him. I've done a couple of meetings with him. He's a phenomenal speaker, not your normal charismatic speaker, but someone who likes to speak as if he's in a conversation with the audience. And you can see that the audience responds to him because he just has this spiritual nature about him that is like a wise grandfather. And when he speaks, I think that his testimony and his experience is so unique that people listen. So this book is out, available right now. You can get it on Back to Jerusalem by ebook, or you can go to Amazon.com and there you'll find the paperback version.
Yeah, so just to reiterate, the ebook is on backtojerusalem.com from the 24th of September. October 1st, you can go to any Amazon site, whichever Amazon site you use, and you'll find the Kindle version, the paperback, and the hardback all available on Amazon from October 1st.
Jihad, The Day I Died. Awesome book, out now. By Back to Jerusalem. Thank you guys so much for joining us for another Back to Jerusalem podcast. Thank you, Bethany, for being with us. It's been a really good time sharing about the podcast together. We want to thank you for downloading this Back to Jerusalem podcast. Again, I'm Eugene Bach, your host for this time, coming to you live on delay from somewhere within the borders of China. God bless.